Hello, 6th graders. This is Mr. Humphreys, and we're on section 7.3, which covers the Pythagorean Theorem. We're going to start right on in with our key idea. Now, the first thing you need to know about the Pythagorean Theorem, this only works with a right triangle. So if a triangle that you are working with looks right, but it doesn't show that it's right, then you can't use the Pythagorean Theorem. So, for example, here's a right triangle. How do I know this is a right triangle? Because in the corner there's a box to denote that that is a right triangle. Now the sides of a right triangle all have special names. This green side is called the hypotenuse, which is represented by the letter C. A and B are represented by legs, the red side and the blue side. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these. The first thing is that the legs are two sides that form the right angle. They are the two smaller sides, and they form the right angle. Now the hypotenuse is the side that is opposite, keyword opposite the right angle. So here's your right angle. The longest side, which is called the hypotenuse, is across from it. So the hypotenuse is across from the right angle, and it's also the longest side. So here's what the Pythagorean Theorem says. It says that in words, in a right triangle, once again, make sure you note it's a right triangle only, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. Now you may be saying to yourself, what in the world? So we're going to start again. The sum, obviously the sum means we're going to add. The squares of the lengths of the legs. Well, the lengths of the legs are A and B, so we're going to square them. A squared plus B squared. It is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. Well, the hypotenuse is C, so we square that. And that is how we get our Pythagorean theorem, which is A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Example number 1. Find the lengths of the missing sides of the triangle. So let me draw a few triangles here. So let's start with example A. We have a triangle with sides that are 5, 12, and C meters. So we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So let's start plugging in what we know. Well, we first have to identify what the sides are. So here's our right angle. The two sides that make that right angle are 5 and 12. So therefore, the 5 and 12 can be plugged in for A and B. Now they can be switched around as well, equals C squared. So let's solve the equation. 5 to the second power is 25. 12 to the second power is 144, equals C squared. 25 plus 144, that gives us 169, equals C squared. Remember, we have to do the inverse operations. We have to know what number to the second power gives you 169. So the square root is the opposite of squaring something. So we take the square root, and so that gives us C equals the square root of 169 gives us 13. So the missing side, which is our hypotenuse, is 13 meters. So let's go to the second problem. The second problem has a triangle of sides 2 and 1/10 and 2 and 9/10 centimeters. So if we start solving this problem, we're going to write down our formula, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Let's now plug in what we know. Well, here's our right angle. So that means if that's our right angle, the two sides that form that are our legs. So that means our leg is one of the missing sides. So I'm going to leave A in there. You could have also left B. So then B is going to be our other leg, which is 2 and 1/10 squared, equals C, the longest side, which is 2.9 squared. So that gives us A squared plus 2 and 1/10 squared. That gives us 4.41. 2.9 times 2.9 gives us 8.41. Now, solving equations. In case you haven't solved equations, which I think you should have by now, The opposite of plus 4.41, we have to move it to the other side, is subtract 4.41. That cancels. That gives us a squared equals 4. I then take the square root of both sides. What number to the second power gives us 4? It would be a equals 2. And lastly, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We're looking at our picture. What side is missing? Our a, our b, or our c? Why? Hopefully you realize that this is the hypotenuse. Here's your right angle. That means these two sides are our legs. So the c is what we have to find. So we have to plug in 2/5 squared plus 3/10 squared. So 2/5 times 2/5 gives us 4/25 plus 3/10 times 3/10 is 9/100 equals c squared. I have to find a common denominator, so that would be 100. That would make this 16/100 plus 9/100. 16/100 plus 9/100 is 25/100. Last step is taking the square root. The square root of 25 is 5. And the square root of 100 is 10. And so 5/10 simplifies into 1/2. So, I'm hoping you noticed, though, something I did on B and C that technically is not correct. Does anyone notice what I did not do on B and C? Hopefully you realize that I didn't label. You have to label. So on part B, we're going to put centimeters. And since I kind of ran out of room, I'm going to put it at the top. C is going to be 1/2 inch. So my answer would be 1/2 inch for C. All right, example number 2 is on page 303 in your 8th grade book. So let's read it together. It's a real-life application. You are playing Capture the Flag. You are 50 yards north and 20 yards east of your team's base. The other team's base is 80 yards north and 60 yards east of your base. How far are you from each other's team? Now, the first thing we're going to do is, if we're looking at our base, this is something I would expect you to come up with on your own. But I gave it to you right off the bat. So, look at this, your base. You are 50 yards north. So look at the arrow. This is your base. So 50 yards north, 20 yards east. So that would be the ordered pair 20-50. So there's your dot. If your other team's base is 80 yards north and 60 yards east, then we're at the ordered pair 60-80. So the dotted line, which I'm going to highlight in red, is what we have to find. So notice what we did, though. Using that side, we can then draw our own right triangle. What side are we trying to find? The red side. What side is that? Okay, it's C or the hypotenuse. How do you know that's C or the hypotenuse? Good. Hopefully you know that the red line is the hypotenuse because it's opposite the right angle. So that means if I'm actually using my Pythagorean theorem, your missing side, the red side, is C. So that means, notice what they did here. They counted by tens, 10, 20, 30. So that means each of these over is 10. So this is 10, 20, 30, 40. This is a length of 40. The other length of a leg is 30. So I'm going to plug in 30 squared plus 40 squared equals C squared. Well, if we simplify that, that's 900 plus 1600 equals C squared. 900 plus 1600 is 2500. We take the square root of both sides. The square root of C squared is C, and the square root of 2500 is 50. So how far are you from the other team's base? You are 50 yards away.